Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Happy Hour. I know that a lot of people have been requesting a therapy related episode. And so I have scoured and it finally happened. We have a therapist on the podcast today. So before we talk about the theme that I think I'd like to focus our therapy concept, our conversation today, I'll do a little intro on who our guest is. So today I have the privilege of having Dr. Timothy Yen on. You're a Bay Area based licensed psychologist. You're also the CEO of a group practice called Pivot Counseling. What was interesting to me when learning about your story is that prior to college, you enlisted in the U.S. Army as a mental health specialist for over 8 years. Your specialties include, but are not limited to, anxiety related issues, depression, trauma related issues, confidence building, family challenges, romantic relationship issues, and decision making. Speaking of which, you are the author of the best-selling book, Choose Better, The Optimal Decision-Making Framework, a text that we'll dive into our conversation today. So I read your book before our conversation, and I feel like this is an amazing topic to talk about, decision-making. I feel like we have an excess of knowledge, and we have so many resources at our fingertips that I feel, and a lot of listeners that have brought in their questions, they feel like they deal with a lot of decision paralysis. And so I was like, okay, I think this is a perfect topic to talk about. But before talking about really the methodology that you created in this book, I'd love to just talk about why you found it necessary at first to write this book.
Yeah, so I'm actually, besides counseling, we also do consulting and coaching. And I was wanting to make that bridge into that world. So the book idea actually came from a kind of a lunch meeting with this kind of top exec person in Taiwan who was here on a business trip. And that was a question that I proposed. I was like, hey, if we were going to go into your company and help your people out, like what would be of most value? And that was her response. Her response was, we have a lot of like brilliant people, smart people in different leadership positions, but everyone's pretty convinced that they're the smartest ones like in the group. And no one really wants to work together. Everyone's just trying to get other people to, listen and buy into what they have to say. So if you can create some sort of methodology, some way to help people make decisive, value-centered decisions as a company, that would be phenomenal. So that's kind of where the book idea first started.
And it's a really universal issue that a lot of people have that I think it's like incredibly applicable because I think when a lot of us go through therapy, there's like different cultural differences, and so you have to apply different like practices to different cultures. But yeah, decision making is universal, so I
It
think
is.
that's what a very interesting origin story on how the book began. And just interested in learning about how you function just as a foundation, because I know that there are a lot of people, it's like, who love structure. I feel I love structure and I love protocol. I love processes. And I also feel like there are also a lot of people who grew up, they go with the flow, spontaneous. Like, did you grow up like as a person who loved protocol and continue to like bolster that skill? Or did you have more of a spontaneity, a levity to yourself, and you decided one day you're like, oh, I need some order in my life?
To answer that question honestly, I have to do a little bit of background childhood type information. So my father is someone like that, very
Mm-hmm.
structured, very orderly, and my mom is an artist. Actually, that's what she majored in. She did fine art. So she's kind of more of the flowy, non-structured kind of person. And I have this strange like hunch that I was that way at some
Mm-hmm.
point. But my father, not to say anything too negatively, but there's some learning challenges in terms of how to parent early on in his father career. And as a result, there was a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear that kind of operated in the family. And as a result, I'm pretty sure it was learned, like out of fear. Like I just didn't want to step on any landmines and create any sort of preventable chaos. I became very on top of things. And as a result, I think the military rewarded me for these neurotic tendencies. But I'm not really sure if it was innate. That's
Mm-hmm.
actually a good question, but it became a big part of my life from then on. So thanks, Dad.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe, yeah, then something you can think more in your therapy practice as well. You're like, huh, I
Yeah,
wonder like how
absolutely.
I
But I love
began
it
this
now.
way.
I definitely embrace it. But the origins, I'm not entirely sure if it's more genetic or if it's kind of a nurtured. type of thing.
Yeah. So let's dive into this framework that you created. So in this book, you create something in the title called the framework. I would like for you to talk about the key points. Yeah, we'll just go from there. Like, can you summarize like what the key points are? I think a question that I also had is that I think there are also centuries long methodologies when it comes to decision making that I'm sure you did your research on in the counseling world and for this book. For example, I mean, it was pretty recently that I learned about like Occam's razor. I think it was developed in the 14th century.
Hmm.
And I mean, to water it down for people, it's like if there are two, I guess, lanes that lead towards the same goal, choose the simpler one.
That's right.
And so after talking about your framework, I'd love to know it's like why you thought it was necessary to create something that was different or that is not existing in this world.
So I cannot take credit and say that my ideas for decision making are completely original. If
Mm-hmm.
anything, the part that may be original is how I configured them, kind of put them together in the sequence that I did, because that is the order in which I'm hoping people will think about making decisions. But the content in and of itself, like it's not like I made it up. It's, scientifically backed. These are things
Yeah.
that, are probably decades, centuries old, but maybe not configured in the way that they are. And what makes the framework perhaps more unique than other frameworks for decision making is my emphasis on emotions and feelings,
Mm-hmm.
because that is something that people typically think of as an afterthought. Like it's not really something worth considering as a vital variable in your decision making. And I kind of put it in the very beginning. It's like the
Yes.
first thing that I want people to think about, because our brain gets that data point very, very quickly. It's 1/10 of a second. So something really quick. It kind of hits your brain. And more than that, it's what it's trying to tell you. And that's a really big part of that chapter is, okay, you're going to feel things if you're human. And instead of seeing it as a nuisance, something that I wish I was more robotic and logical and I just didn't have to consider how I feel, they're kind of just in the way. I make the argument that it's actually really crucial to make great, authentic decisions. So that is the first step, right? One big part of the framework is asking the question, how do I feel? And
Mm-hmm.
what does that mean? What is it trying to tell me? And the thing about humans, Brene Brown would be key in saying this as well, as we typically have more than one feeling at the same time. We don't just feel happy, just feel sad. Uh, Even something like bittersweetness, like to feel bittersweet is actually a combination of sadness and relief or happiness, looking forward to something. So feelings are very complex. There's a lot going on with how we feel, but every feeling has a function. There's a reason for why you feel the way that you do. So that's a big piece of the framework. And then the other pieces, just to go through it quickly, right, is values of self. So these are the things that you care about, things that matter to you. And then there are values of others. So things that other people care about that mean something to them. And we want to create a world that ideally works for everyone, not just for you or for others. And so it's kind of considering your values as well as the values of others. The last piece of it is reality factors, I call it, which is, like when's the deadline? What is at stake? Just normal type things that we want to consider. And then we kind of put all that together. We can come up with a few options that kind of speak to each of these variables. And then courage, the courage to
Mm-hmm.
actually follow through, which typically there's a reason why we're not already making those decisions. Is either we never thought about it in the first place, or we have thought about it, but there's a lot of either conscious or unconscious fears that keep us from following through. And being able to work through that process will help us, give us courage to do what's right.
Yeah, I agree when you say that you put the emotion factor as the first part of your framework, as like step one, let's say. And I think that's also a lot of these older methodologies don't implement, because I think as a society we're like tapping more into our emotions nowadays. So I feel like, yeah, it does make sense to create something that is more in line with our modern culture. So yeah, I'd love to focus on like the emotion aspect, because like decision making framework, like steps, yeah, sometimes we keep the emotions out of it because we want to be rote, we want to be as logical as possible. But yeah, I mean, I learned in your book that 90% of our actions are driven by emotions, and you also have spent some time talking about the difference between emotions and feelings, which I never really thought about. So can you just differentiate between them two?
Yeah, and hopefully I don't have these definitions swapped, but the difference between the two, if I can recall, my gut instinct is telling me that feelings are the actual physiological responses when you feel a certain way. So when you're anxious, maybe your heart beats faster, muscle tension, kind of get clammy, butterflies in the stomach, like that would be the feeling. But the emotions is actually how we make sense of what's happening. So that's when we give it a label. We're like, oh, like this is happy, this is sad. So, one is an actual physical
Mm.
manifestation of that said feeling, and then emotions is how we make sense of what's happening.
I see. So I guess it would like the feelings kind of come first, and then you extrapolate what the feelings mean, and that turns into emotions. Is that how I'm getting it?
Right. You call it something. Yeah, whatever
You
that is,
call.
whatever sensation phenomenon is happening, we call it something, and that's the emotions. But again, don't quote me. It could be the other way around, but that is the difference between these two terms.
Yes, there is a difference. And if you want to
Yes.
corroborate, listeners, you can buy this book after this conversation. So, talking about emotional intelligence is also a conversation that is increasing in our day to day lives. And I do have this observation that I often hear people around my age, who maybe in the millennial age or the Gen Z age, they're like, I mean, I feel like the reason, my parents and I, we have these disagreements is because, my parents, they lack certain emotional intelligence. And I hear that a lot. It's like there is that bit of a generational gap. And so they're like, yeah, my parents just didn't have that emotional intelligence for today's modern world. And like, what do you make of that? Do you think that's a true explanation? And if so, do you see a pattern that emotional intelligence is in fact increasing over generations, if I'm saying that correctly?
I sure hope so. I sure hope that we are all evolving as a human race, but I'm sure we're going backwards in some areas, going forward in others. I love the direction that mental health is going. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
am very blessed to be in an era where people are starting to care about their mental health because they realize that with great mental health, it makes everything easier. When you have poor mental health, it makes everything impossibly harder. And to answer your first question about uh, our parents' generation, just for your listeners, I identify as Taiwanese Chinese American. That would be my cultural
Same.
heritage,
Yes.
right? And we're second gen. I think that's what they call it. So my parents came from their mother countries to become the first Americans, and then I was born in California, so I would be a second generation Asian American, and that is probably a very common trend that you're talking about, Melissa, right? Which is emotions was not given much of a platform for my parents or their
Yeah.
generation. I could be overgeneralizing. Of course, there's probably outliers, but when I think about my immigrant parents, that was not very high in the hierarchy of things to pay attention to care about. If anything, they probably had some old school ways of thinking that emotions are kind of annoying and nuisances, and what do I do with anger, right? Like I should just get rid of it, or sadness is weakness, and all sorts of weird messages that they've been given. And so, like the saying goes, you can't give what you don't have. So if my parents did not have that type of understanding or value even for emotions, then why would they pass that on to me? So not as a hard knock against our predecessors or our elders, so to speak. But yeah, I would argue that they didn't have as much emotional intelligence simply because they didn't know that it was important. They didn't know to
Yeah.
care about it. And on the reverse, I believe that emotional intelligence Much like intelligence in general, it can be boistered, right? It can be grown, it can be cultivated. So, especially emotional intelligence, it is something that people can get better at. The key ingredient is a willingness, a desire to be able to see the value in emotional intelligence. Otherwise, then even the best therapists or whoever can't help you. But if there is an openness in saying, yeah, I would like to be comfortable with my own emotions, understand what that's trying to tell me, and in turn, I'm able to communicate those things. I'm able to care about what other people feel and what that's trying to tell me. Yes, it would probably make for a better world if people were more emotionally attuned.
Yeah, yeah. And then like my parents too. And a lot of our parents, who have a very similar story. It's like they just also didn't have the privilege or the time to. There is something also that I'd love to talk about, which is and see how it like works within your method, is the science of gut health, because I feel like gut feelings, gut intuition, it's this emerging research. And it's really fascinating that, yes, your gut, a lot of people say your gut is your second brain. There's a gut brain connection. Your gut and brain are made by the same fetal tissue. So, like, they are inextricably connected. And so, a lot of people say, they'll make like, I don't want like this 4 to 5 step process. Just go with your gut. Just go with your gut. Like, and that'll tell you. Um, it is there, do you think that kind of saying is harmful when it comes to making decisions?
So I'm all about gut health. I think that if your gut ain't healthy, then it's going to affect many things, including your ability to think clearly and, yeah, just a myriad of feelings that come with being uncomfortable or whatever the case may be. So, yes, go gut health. That's very important if you don't have that going for you. But that's saying like go with your gut. Funny enough, I'm actually very pro gut feeling in a sense,
Mm-hmm.
because what that tells me is your gut, which is just another way of saying your instinct, right? Your instinct kind of kicks in and you have and again, what are these instincts? Usually it's really not all that complicated. It kind of comes down to two different directions. Either it's warm or cold, right? When you have a
Yeah.
gut instinct, it's either I want to draw near to you, get closer to this. It sounds like a good idea. It feels good. Or no, danger, bad. I want to create distance. I want to move away from it. That's really what it comes down to. So if you think about what the gut instinct is, it really is just a survival instinct. It's just saying, hey, something fishy is happening around here. I feel something. My spider senses are tingling. I'm picking something up in the atmosphere. I can't even quite put the words to what it is yet, but I know how I
Mm-hmm.
feel about it. And
Mm-hmm.
I would say a lot of times your gut's probably right when it comes to survival type things. Now, if we're just talking about making decisions in general, I don't think all of our decisions are about survival, like do or
Yeah.
die kind of thing.
Yeah.
So if you want to make great decisions in things that are not just about survival, then you might want to consider the framework, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
a little bit more complex than that. That being said, that's the first pillar of the framework, which is what are your feelings trying to tell you? So starting with that, what your gut is saying, is a great place to start, but I wouldn't recommend that being the end all be all and kind of ignoring everything else and saying this is how I feel, therefore I'm going to make that call. Even if you're like 80-90% correct, it just might be worth checking out that last 10 to 20% to make sure your gut's aligned with some facts, not just your
Mm-hmm.
feelings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, re-outlining the framework again for the listeners. So it starts with emotions, and it starts next with values of self. Then it's followed by values of others, and then reality. What are the facts of the situation? And then having the courage to follow through. So someone's like, okay, I'm feeling the emotions. How do I feel? I know how I feel and why I feel this way. And now they're moving on to the values of self and values of others. What happens if there are like conflicting values between themselves and others? And they're like, I'm stuck in the framework. I don't know what to do.
That's a great question. So if the problem is worth solving, chances are you're going to run into that challenge
Mm-hmm.
because there are usually conflicting values at play. And in a perfect world, everyone would be happy, everyone gets what they want. But in the more complicated situations, that's rarely the case. And it feels like someone has to give up a portion of their values in order for you to maybe achieve yours. And that's actually a difference between values of self and others. So I'm getting a little ahead of myself. If we're talking about just values of self, you too will have conflicting interests. Like, hey,
Yeah.
if we're going to talk about food, right? If
Mm-hmm.
if there is, hey, I have a value for eating healthy because I know when I eat clean, it makes my body feel good, but then it makes my taste buds sad and I don't want to eat some of that kind of food. I want to eat really delicious food, which sometimes
Mm-hmm.
goes against what's good for my body. There you go. There are two values that you both hold dear, but they don't seem to always work together. And so in those kind of situations, I mean, first of all, you got to know what you're dealing with. So even being able to articulate just what I said about food, I mean, that's you're already like 80% there in terms of making a good call. Like you're just already in the know. But from there, and I might mention, I think I mentioned it in the book, is then you have to rank order them, right? If it's
Mm-hmm.
between the two, and then you start kind of factoring all these other things, maybe certain seasons valuing the healthy food makes more sense because of your other values, which is just wholeness, wellness. Okay, that's a higher value than just delicious food. So for a season, you may end up making a decision based on that. In another chapter of your life, you're like, I'm pretty dang healthy. I'm eating well, I'm feeling good. I can have a few cheat meals and be totally fine. Hey, in this situation, I can value my taste buds and eat something really delicious. So it changes from thing to thing, context to context. It's just
Mm-hmm.
being informed, right, of what you're deciding.
Yeah, and I guess that's how the reality step also helps too, because like your values will change based on season. And like when it comes to
Yeah.
the context of food, it's like, yeah, maybe today I want to indulge, and maybe the next day I'll want to, eat something that's more like nourishing. So yeah, like the circumstances will change. So hopefully that'll indicate what your values will be for self and for others. So implementing, let's like someone's like, okay, I see the main context for the framework, I'm going to try to implement this, but rewiring your brain to implement this new framework is going to be quite tricky. So I'd like to know your experience. Like so you've created this framework, like drawing from science and a lot of already existing knowledge, but implementing it into your life. What was that transition process like for you? And I'm sure it's still like an ongoing journey as well.
Yeah, so I don't want people to feel overly burdened and be like, oh, so I'm learning this framework. Gosh,
Yeah.
every decision that I make, I got to go through these like 4 or 5 steps. Well, how bothersome. And what I would say to that is, no, you don't need to do this for every decision that you make. That's kind
Mm-hmm.
of silly. However, for the ones that really matter, like big decisions, I mean, can you afford to not work through the framework and make sure all your bases are covered? Why would you leave it up to chance? Like that's my big thing is make sure you implement it where it really matters. And in other areas, I think I wrote there in the book, sometimes you don't even need every single pillar. Like if you're going to an ice cream shop, it's almost purely based on how you feel. Like I don't even know if there's
Yeah.
a moral objective right or wrong answer to what you should choose. Like what are you feeling today? If you're feeling strawberry, go for it, right? That's the right answer for you. So I don't want people to get too bogged down in thinking that they have to implement this thing everywhere. But funny enough, I was thinking about a client that I'm working with right now, and
Mm-hmm.
she is trying to kind of get her life back in order. She has a lot of kind of free time at her hands, and as a result, it's hard to be productive because it just
Yeah.
feels like she has a lot of time on her hands. She could do it, but she doesn't have to do it. There's no real urgency. And I didn't introduce the framework to her specifically, but the thing that made the biggest difference for her was just setting some time aside in the very beginning of her morning to decide, this is what I would like to accomplish today. 2 or 3 things. And if I do those 2 to 3 things, I would say, yes, I was successful for the day. I can look at myself in the mirror, feel proud about it. Everything else is bonus. I don't need to like beat myself, over trying to do more. Like if I just did what I set out to do, then I feel good about it. And I would say the framework is very similar. It's saying, hey, before I decide if I'm going to go on this date, if I decide if I'm going to take this job, whatever the case may be, you are just setting whatever 10 to 15 minutes aside just to jot down some of these ideas that relate to the framework. And it's like seeing the whole playbook right in front of you.
Yeah.
And my guess is you're just going to feel a lot more confident about whatever you decide to do.
Yeah. It's inherently kind of present in everything that we do. So when you're saying like write down the 3 goals you want to do today, once again, like the circumstance of how you're feeling or the circumstance of your schedule that day is going to dictate how you rank your values, how you rank your goals for that day.
That's right.
Um and of course the courage to follow through those 3 tasks. So I have a couple of situational questions from my audience, and
Okay.
I think it would be great to bring those questions up and then see how we can help them apply the framework. Maybe help them brainstorm a couple of questions that like they can ask themselves just to start.
Sure.
Okay, this is exciting. All right. So, number one, this person says that he's been in a 3-year relationship and the topic of marriage has come up. How do I know when I'm ready?
All right. Well, we can probably tackle that in a variety of ways because even that question alone is there. I mean, there's more questions to be asked about that question. What does it even mean to be ready? Is there someone that will definitively tell you like when you have these duckies in a row, then you're ready? When you don't have these duckies in a row, you're not? Is being ready more subjective than objective? So there's a lot of things even just to unpack. So
Yeah.
that's where counseling would kick in, right? To have an objective third party, a professional kind of talk someone through that process would help that individual kind of figure out what readiness even means. And then, there's even questions about like the value of marriage for that
Yeah.
person or for the other person. So a lot of, as you can see, parts of the framework already being brought up just in the organic process of figuring out what that question even means to that particular person. But, just for the sake of using it as an example, yeah,
Yeah.
let's run it through. Let's run it through the framework. See what that would look like or sound like. So, through your relationship, marriage is coming up, feelings. I'm sure there's feelings that are coming up for this
Yes.
individual. And I don't know, but I am happily married. Shout out to my wife, Tiffany, and my 2 kids, my 2 sons. I love being married. I love my family. And I was single at one point. So I had to make that
Mhm.
decision, that very decision as well. So I'll kind of walk it through my own
Yeah, for sure.
anecdotal process, but of course, keeping it a little bit more broad for your audience. So feelings, what kind of feelings come up? Probably a mixture of feelings. Anxiety is probably the first one that most people think of. Like, but then let's just kind of drill into that emotion. So why would I feel anxious? Why would I have some sense of fear? Well, anxiety as a function, it's about keeping you safe. It's about
Mhm.
making sure no harm comes your way. It's this idea that if I can predict what's coming down the pipe, I'll be more prepared and therefore I can avert that pain if possible. So that leads me to think, okay, there's something about making a commitment that's making me feel anxious. What is it, right? Is it the fact that I am quote unquote stuck with this person for the rest of my life? I won't be able to have the freedom to date other people. Am I afraid that the person that I think I'm marrying is actually not the person that I'm going to be marrying? And maybe 2 years down the line, this individual is going to change on me. And then now I'm like in trouble, but I don't want to get a divorce. Right. So there's a lot of potential reasons why this person may be getting some cold feet, thinking about marriage. And again, it starts with identifying that feeling. And of course, if it's happiness, then I don't know, there's probably not a whole lot of deliberation. My guess is like, I feel happy, I feel joy about the prospect of marriage. Yeah, then you can kind of move through the stages. But usually some of the more quote unquote negative feelings is what makes us pump the brakes, right? Kind of think a little bit more. So I didn't want to run through all of them. Any thoughts, comments about that before I run through the other
Yeah.
ones?
Yeah, and I think like when it comes to, because most of my audience members are also Asian too. I get a mix
Yeah.
of good audience members, but I feel like I mean, this is an Asian podcast, so we all know where to
Happy
they
hour.
all gravitate
Yeah.
towards this. And like I think like kind of running through the framework for this person too, it's like the values of others is definitely going to be something that's going to be placed much emphasis on for those Asian families. And I think like in our modern world where there's also like same-sex marriage, like how are your parents, like are they traditional, are they much more um accepting of that dynamic? And so it's like something that I feel like so many more questions nowadays when I think
Yes.
of like values.
Yes. So I guess we're moving forward. Yes. So
Yeah.
the feelings that may be coming up may very well be because it's clashing with values. It could be clashing
Uh-huh.
between your values and other people's values, or the fear of how another person will respond. So you may not even know, but there's like a fear that maybe they're not going to respond well because X, Y, and Z. So that's important. That's important to kind of unpack. And what I would say is when things rely in the unconscious, you can't do anything about it. But when you talk these things out and you make them conscious, which is pretty
Mm.
much what counseling is, right? You're
Mm-hmm,
making the
mm-hmm.
unconscious, forces that are affecting your life become visible to you. Well, now you just become empowered. You got options. You can choose now what you want to do with that information. So that's a quick plug on counseling, but that's the first part of it, right? Is the feelings piece. And like I said, there's probably going to be more than one, but just taking the time to be like, why do I feel that way? What are these feelings trying to tell me? That's the first step. Moving along, values of self. Yeah, let's talk about marriage. Not everyone values marriage the same way. There's people who are highly skeptical of marriage and the implications of what marriage means, but depending on what they've witnessed in their own life, in their own childhood, whether or not marriages worked or did not work. So there's a bunch of things that come up already when it comes to the value of marriage. And the first step is to make the unconscious conscious, like be able to
Mm-hmm.
say that out loud and be like, hey, I don't really value marriage. These are the reasons why. Or I really do value marriage because I think this is what marriage is. So being able to have those kind of conversations with yourself would be pretty important. Then, as you were alluding to earlier, values of others. You're not marrying yourself. So you're going to
Yeah,
involve other
marrying the
people.
family, that's all what I'm gonna
Yeah, that's
say.
right. Everybody. That's right. You marry the in-laws, the cousins, the whoever that may be, intimately involved in your partner's life. And so what are the things that they care about? And
Uh-huh.
sometimes that's the rub, is maybe you do not hold a traditionally respectable, stable career, and the values of your Asian counterparts really care about that kind of stuff. Whether you should be a doctor, an engineer, something that has reliable security, or else I don't trust you with my daughter, or whatever the
Yeah.
setup may be. And so, just again, being aware of that. And this early in the process, you're not even here to like agree or disagree. You're literally just spelling out the facts. Like, hey, these are things that are relevant to this decision making. I'm just putting it out there. Don't need to rush anything. There's no urgency. I just want to know what I'm up against, if you want to call it that. And then, of course, there's the reality factors, which may go in with that earlier question, which is, am I ready to be married? Well, with marriage, there are certain expectations that are probably common within marriage. Things like, you probably want to stay together. I don't know. It's kind of a crazy idea. Maybe you want to live together, right? Well, what does that look like
Mm-hmm.
financially? What does that look like for both of your careers? If you both are working, one person, works 2 hours away and the other one, lives 3 hours away from this location. Like being able to like logistically kind of figure out like, what does that look for us? A timeline, there's all sorts of things logistically that are worth talking about. So deciding, hey, do I have the capacity, the mental, emotional bandwidth to tackle those things? If I'm in the middle of like my residency in med school, this is probably like not the best time to be talking about these logistics. So, reality factors,
Mm-hmm.
play in. And then, then you do a shuffling of sorts. You kind of take all that information into account. Then you come up with some options, right? You come up with, okay, well, yes, I want to get married, and this is what it will look like. Maybe it's a wait. I want to get married, but not tomorrow. Maybe it's something like 6 months from now because of this, right? Or I did this framework process and I realized I do not want to get married because of X, Y, and Z. Well, you should probably do your partner a solid and share that now and not drag this poor person through that wants to get married just to realize 6 years from now you don't feel like it. You don't feel like getting married. Like how messed up is that, right? So yes, right. Even if the answer is no, you're still honoring the other person by letting them know, hey, I did Dr. Yen's framework, kind of went through each step. I realized this is what's most true to me. So what do we do from here, right? So, and there may be more than three options. I'm just saying, right? Like those may be three options that come up, and then from there you get to decide, okay, how do I break this information to my 3-year relationship? Like, what are my fears? What are the consequences that I anticipate? And yeah, even being able to talk through some of those things. Maybe as a disclaimer, you're like, hey, I thought this through. I have the sneaky suspicion you're not going to like my answer. And I'm just trying to emotionally embrace for that. And I just want to let you know that that's kind of where I'm at right now. And hopefully you have a cool partner that's like, hey, you can tell me anything. Like I just need to know where you're coming from. And don't worry, I'm not going to lash out or verbally abuse you. Like just say what you got to say. We'll kind of work through, what we need to work through. So yeah, so that's just kind of a quick and dirty way of using the framework.
I hope we didn't scare this person away, but I mean, I think sometimes it's like we have to be, real with when it comes to marriage, because I think a lot of people sometimes I see on like these reality TV shows, it's like the guy proposes to the girl and the girl's like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And I was like, wait, I feel like you should be having these conversations about marriage. And that's just what I feel like is healthy. And sometimes they just like all rush into this marriage.
Yes.
And I think that could sprout a lot of problems, because it's like, you're marrying into the family. It's going to hopefully be this lifelong partnership that you guys have. So asking those questions are very, very important. It's better to do them now than later when you're still together and have lots of things that you still have to figure out. Okay. So let's go on to another situation. So this one is about healing from a big conflict with a close friend. So we're also in an age where we hate confrontation. We just prefer to do everything on text. We don't want to face-to-face talk to each other. So let's run through the framework for dealing with a fallout from a friend then.
Yeah, sure. And again, I don't want to bore your listeners by going through every step of the framework again and again. So maybe some high level thoughts about that.
Yes.
So going back to the feelings, right? Going back to the feelings. So why aren't you comfortable with confrontation? Let's start there. So chances are you have some sort of imagined thing in your head that's not pleasant, whatever it may be. It may be having to face the possibility of rejection, right? Some sort of rejection, some sort of abandonment. You really put your heart out there, you took a risk, and then you get rewarded with a slap in the face, just your worst nightmare, whatever it is that may play out. And to be honest, I think that's why most people avoid confrontation, is that they have this picture in their head that it's not good, just not good, whatever it may be. But what we don't often do is look at the other very possible options of how people may respond. And in a weird way, it's almost like we don't have faith in our friends. Like if we have this like lifelong relationship, and again, I get it. Like we as human beings are very relational. We care a lot about being attached, staying attached. So there's like psychological pain from rejection, from this rupture, this break, and we do everything in our power, kind of unconsciously, to not have to feel that, even if it's already there. We just don't really want to face it. And so sometimes I think people just don't give their friends enough credit. They just
Yeah.
assume that they're going to be the worst. They're going to kick them to the curb. It's like, bro, we've been friends for like 15 years. Like, why am I assuming the worst in you? If anything, I should assume the best in you. Like, how would you respond? Like, do you value the relationship the way I value the relationship? If the answer is yes, yeah, we would totally appreciate a peace offering from the other party, because it takes a lot of guts, and usually one party's too scared to say anything. That's why it's like really awkward for like 2 years and no one says anything. And so being able to kind of counterbalance these fears and saying, yeah, I could totally be kicked to the curb and it's the worst experience of my life, but that does tell me that the way that person values me is not at the same level as me valuing them. And it's just kind of a wake up call. It's sad, it's sobering. I'm not saying it's a great wake up call, but sometimes we realize, why am I caring so much about a person who doesn't care about me? Like,
Mm.
why am I holding so much power, giving this power to this other person? But again, if you're having a little bit more faith in your friend, right, you would be like, okay, we had some good times together, and we were there for one another during really difficult times. There was a misunderstanding, there's kind of a falling out that happened. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and saying that
Mhm.
he or she cares about me too. So as long as I'm able to, kind of broach the subject with humility, with respect, these are all values, right? Humility,
Mhm.
respect, and love, then if I truly care about this relationship, then this person would be worth fighting for. It would be worth my time to face those fears. And chances are the outcomes are going to be way, way, way better than you could possibly imagine most of the
Yeah.
time.
And from this person asking this question, I feel like I can sense her really finding the relationship important for her to like ask this question. So I
Yes.
think that's also an
Yes.
indicator that it is a friendship that is quite important, and hopefully a friend that, you'll want to spend the time to value that continued friendship. And once again, like what you were saying, like valuing the friendship at its core, is this an important friendship to me or not? And like if not, then sometimes, like, yes, you do have to let people go. But you said, in this person said it's a close friend, so yeah, I think that there is hope. There is hope.
Yeah.
Okay, well, to wrap up our conversation, so everyone knows already, we've talked about many times the different steps of the framework. I mean, of course, with big decisions, I think having framework is going to be so important, but to just speak broadly on a day-to-day lifestyle, when it comes to optimizing your day, choosing the best decisions to optimize your day, like what do you think is like one small habit that people can do every day to like really optimize their quality of life?
Yeah. So recently I've been exploring this. I believe the author's name is Hal Elrod. He wrote his book called The Miracle Morning. And he essentially just talks about the hardest part for most people is waking up early. That's like the hardest part. But waking up early in the morning, but with a purpose, like not just to,
Yes.
I don't know, wake up early to wake up early, but he has also a sequence of things. He has like these 6 steps to kind of go through in the morning. And so, a huge plug for him. I think the Miracle Morning is definitely on the right track. It's helped millions of people, but it may not be for everyone in terms of like that particular setup. So, kind of to piggyback off of his idea, it is just being able to have a conscious moment, unplugged, away from your social media, off of your screens, off of whatever it is that
Yes.
fights for your attention, and saying, hey, well, today is whatever day, Monday. And these are the things that are on the docket. Why are they on the docket in the first place? Like, just be able to even talk about, why are these things on my docket to do? What value does that even reflect about me? And sometimes even going through that process, you'll realize I don't need everything on the docket. Like, I'm doing these things for so and so people, maybe because I value them and their opinions, but it doesn't really serve me whatsoever. It doesn't align with my values. So even maybe in that process, you're already knocking some stuff off the list. You're just like, that's not even something that I want to prioritize. But like I said, within the list, being able to be clear-minded and saying, hey, shifting away from perfectionism, right? And saying, hey, look, I would be content for starters if I were able to just do these one or two things. And this is the reason why I want to do these things. It could be finishing a paper. You can care less about the paper, but you care a lot about growing, about getting, a good grade in the class, because it aligns with the kind of work that you want to do in the future. Even just being able to verbalize the why behind what you're doing will give it so much more meaning versus just living in autopilot where we just kind of do things to do things. It's like what's expected of us, whatever the case may be. I would say if you can't verbalize why you're doing something and why it's important to you, you may want to reassess why you're doing that thing in the first place. But again, I think just carving out 5 to 10 minutes of your day just to think about the rest of your day would be a huge game changer. Whether you use my framework or not, just having some sort of time to take charge of your day, be intentional. I guess be intentional about your day. That would be a game changer, I think, for a lot of people.
That's like, I think one of the big takeaways from me personally really is to a lot of us, we write down a list of what we need to do, but asking your why is going to really help you solidify the best task list that you could have for that day. So I think that's incredibly helpful information to hold. Yeah, and I would like to just thank you so much for your time to just speaking with me and to my listeners who had questions. If anyone else has any questions for you, or would love to hopefully maybe work with you or with your coworkers, where can they best find you?
Yeah, so they can just go on my website, www.timyen.com, and top right corner, there's a contact page. So fill in your information, and I would love to hear from anyone who would have a question, some sort of project, anything that they would like to run by me. I am more than happy to hear from you.
Perfect. Well, Tim, thank you so much for coming on Happy Hour. I really appreciate this talk.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.